Hey, and thanks for coming back to the show. Today's episode, we have a really interesting conversation about vaginas, what we know about them, and what misinformation is out there.
But we're starting this episode with a little disclaimer. After the conversation, one of our guests shared with us that we should have done a better job about using inclusive language throughout this conversation. We can only work to be better when presented with our missteps, and we're grateful it was pointed out to us.
So, stick around after the show where we'll share some inclusive language before diving into our Reflect and Deconstruct segment. We apologize to anyone who may feel triggered by hearing language that's not inclusive. That being said, we learned a lot in this episode, so definitely tune in and join us on this particularly unky journey of growth. Enjoy the show.
Hey, and welcome back to the show. I'm Tsilala.
And I'm Xann. And this is UNCK.
We want UNCK to be a place where we can visualize and work through uncomfortable conversations while providing each other with the tools to become better at uncomfortable conversations through reflections and receipts. In this episode, we have an intimacy coach, a doula, an acupuncturist, and a sales director that's going to join us for Me and My Vagina. So, if you haven't already, hit the like button and subscribe to our channel on YouTube or on your podcast platform of choice, as it helps our podcast grow. All right, let's get into it.
Hello, everyone. My name is Kenna. I'm an acupuncturist. She, her is great. I'm also Muncie Lenape.
Hey y'all, my name is Lucia. I use she, her pronouns. I'm coming to you live from occupied Muskogee Creek territory, now called Decatur, Georgia.
So Jose Lopez, he, him. And as Kenna was alluding to, I'm also in the Muncie Lenape tribe.
Okay, so I wanted to start with a fun little quiz that I created. Just asking what we know, what we don't know. All right, name game. I'm so excited. Can you tell us what this is?
The vulva.
How do you feel if you had to give yourself a grade there?
Like a C minus. A C. Really. I had never seen the image of the clitoris before. Like in the full outline. Mm-hmm. Like I'd always
That's
seen
the second
it in
image, right?
Yeah.
I'd
always seen it like associated to the vulva, but not like isolated in its own. Like I don't think that before this prepping for the show that I would have known that I ever would have guessed that that's what that was.
I think it's so big. Like people don't realize how big it is.
Oh, it's an organ, man. That thing is huge.
Yeah. I definitely didn't know all the integral parts. Yeah,
exactly.
Lucia's like, I knew all this stuff.
No, I didn't know all of the names of the different parts of the clitoris, but everything else I knew.
So, I mean, this is just to jump us into one thing about being uncomfortable is recognizing what we know, what we don't know.
Absolutely. So jumping into the question segment of our show about our experiences with vaginas, I want to open up the floor a little bit. I wanted to start by sharing my own unky moment before asking you each one specific question. So as part of this show, we really like to dig into our own unky experiences to help others feel comfortable with sharing their experiences and normalizing particularly taboos. On the show, we do a lot of that, but normalizing bad experiences as well as good experience so we can learn from those. So the one that kind of stuck out the most to me was when I was not the first of my friends to get my period, but I was in the first group. And so when my friends first started getting their periods, I was given this book, this cartoon of like understanding your period. And when we were prepping the show, Tsilala had been given the same book where it kind of like explained the process and like how everything works. And in being given this book, both of my parents had kind of said, I think that there's a spectrum of parent. There's the parent who like tells you everything. There's the parent who tells you nothing. And then there's this like middle ground of like, we can talk about it if you bring it up or if you have questions, but like, I'm not going to be your sex ed or your women's health teacher. And so my parents kind of gave me this book and they were like, if you have any, learn on your own. But if you have any questions, anything comes up, like, please know that our door is always open. And to me, that meant a lot that it was also coming from my dad, because obviously you idolize both of your parents. And, I had understood the taboo of like, we don't talk about women's health or our vaginas or menstruation. Like, I understood that societally that was like not really okay to talk about. And so for my dad, one of two figures in my life who was a constant to say, if you have questions, you can come to me too. Part of my brain, I think, was like, I want to test him on that. But it meant a lot that he was like, my door is open. And so right after I got my first period, I took him up on his offer. And I like remember having the book in my hands and like coming up to him and my face being all red and being super nervous. Can't remember the question that I actually asked him, but the door that I told was unlocked was like shut in my face right away. And he was like, I don't want to talk about this. You can talk to your mom if you have any questions. Like, she's the one for you to go to. And the domino effect of that was I shut down completely, because I felt like I couldn't ask anybody any questions, that even if people said that they were comfortable or they were open, they weren't. And everything I basically learned from this book and then from asking my other friends, which is a tangential topic that I won't really get into, but Michelle Obama talks about it on her new podcast, where young girls really in our society are learning about women's their health through their friends. So like 13-year-olds are teaching other 13-year-olds about sex, about menstruation, about what products, sanitary items you should use, about birth control. And that's wild to me. Like, shouldn't we be learning from our elders? And so, basically that moment of being shut down really like shut down my own want to learn and explore through others, through asking questions and everything else, which could have ended up really in a dangerous pattern. I just wanted to share that sort of unky moment of wanting to share and not having a safe space where I could explore, and how that really impacted me a lot, especially in the early days of like understanding my own body and taking care of myself and what my options were, etc. So as I said, I have a question for each of you. Lucia, I would love to start with you. Was there a moment when you asked a parental figure a question about your vagina, and was the response negative or positive? How did you react? How did that impact you?
I don't think I talked to my parents about my vagina. When you were talking about how you talk to your friends, it's like, I didn't know what a tampon was until one of my friends was like, come into the stall, I'll show you how to insert it. And mostly the closest we got to talking about our vagina was when the school that I went to for sex ed had someone with AIDS come to our class and just was like, I'm dying because I had sex. And so I went home and I was like, oh my God, this really traumatic thing happened at school today. My mom was like, well, AIDS. So, let me know if you have any questions. It's like, cool. So I didn't really talk to my mom about my vagina until my period started. And, I didn't have any money. So she had to buy me pads. And like, I was only allowed to have pads because I was a girl and it was naughty to put anything in your vagina. So I think those were the only conversations, was just like, only because I needed pads. and then never spoken about or referenced to ever again. Like a disappearing organ.
Yeah. I wonder if we did a survey, how many women would have learned about tampons and how to use tampons through going into the stalls with their friends.
Yeah, I think a lot of people with vaginas learned that way because a lot of people with vaginas' parents are like, I'm not inserting anything. I'm not helping you insert anything into your precious flower. You know, I could go on and on about how disconnected from the vulva and vagina we are as a society when really that's like the place where it all begins. But yeah, I think in general, people have like a vagina vulva phobia. It like bleeds, it gives life. Scary. Yeah.
My mother told me that you could not insert a tampon into your vagina until you have had sex. Like, I learned differently like 4 years later. Like, this is incorrect. I'm a dancer and I can't wear a pad while I go onto stage. You know, it has nothing, but that was her, like, it's the same thing about, like, I don't know, you can't turn a light on in the car. Just like little white lies the parents used to do.
Jose, the next question is for you. When was the first time that someone spoke to you about vaginas, or was your first experience through sex?
Somebody as in like a parental figure? Or like could it have been a peer, like, or
Yeah, anyone. Like, what was your first experience as a male, as the male representative on our show today? What was the first time that you talked to somebody, that somebody talked to you about vaginas?
So I have 3 memories that pop up, all of which are like I kind of like blacked out in a way. Like I remember the conversation starting, and then I don't remember anything of the like any context. So one was me and my cousin when we were little, like playing show and tell. And apparently my aunt brought up the story recently. Like apparently like I cried because I showed my cousin my penis and she wouldn't show me her vagina. I was like 5 or something. And because she wouldn't show it to me, I was like crying. And then like, so there was a conversation about like, okay, you know, but again, I was like 4 or 5, playing show and tell. So I don't remember what the conversation was. I do remember my father being overly excited from my perspective about talking about the birds and the bees when I was maybe, I don't know, 13 or something like that. And he was like, I remember him telling people like, oh, we're going to have the talk today. And I like several people like family members or friends of the family or whatever. And I didn't understand what he was referring to. And he was just like excited about it. And then he brought me to the library and I was so embarrassed. My perspective was that he was like standing on the table, like holding a book, like this is a penis. And like to me, it was just like, I thought he was screaming, but I don't think he was. I think he was just trying to share it with me, but I was so embarrassed. I couldn't even take it in. So that's the second memory. And I'm kind of forgetting the third one, but it was of a similar vein where like, I really don't, I was so embarrassed that I don't even remember, you know, again, what the conversation really felt like besides just like, you know, being too young or immature to take it in. So I hope that answers the question. I think obviously as a male, it's a different perspective, but.
Absolutely. I mean, the fact that even a parent was like, let me break this down for you, no matter how embarrassing that was, I feel like that's absolutely a step in the right direction. And I think everybody can relate to a story when they were younger of doing something that was where you were trying to explore and it was embarrassing. So, but that's interesting that you don't remember the details of either of those stories, even though the starting of the story is so impactful to you.
I mean, at least when I was like really little playing show and tell, like I don't remember it. I think just because I was so young and who knows how much I was able to actually retain and what they said. But the second one, when my father was actually trying to educate me, I like blacked out because I was just so embarrassed. So like, I don't, you know, I just remember and feeling as though he was sharing with the world and everyone knew that my father was talking to me about something that was very uncomfortable. And so that was it. That's the only memory I have and feeling that I have. But yeah, I mean, good for him for trying.
Absolutely. So Kenna, the last question's for you. Did you ever have a moment with your vaginal health or education that you felt unprepared for? And what was the support system around you? How did you handle and move through that moment?
Yeah, I think mine came a bit later when I started being sexually active, and I knew I didn't want to take the birth control pill. And I tried like the Nuvaring for a bit, and I just personally, I didn't like what it did to my body. And I also, like, my mom was pretty awesome with like explaining what she could and like, you know, showing me a tampon the first time I wanted to, because I was a dancer too. So I feel really lucky in that. But her and I brought it up to her like other forms, and I think she gave me the information that she could. But I like had heard of like women who like knew their cycles, so they knew when they were fertile or not. And I was like, what? Like, you can't get pregnant all month long? Like, what are we talking about here? And that sort of started in college, and then on this like search for like any information I could get on basically what fertility awareness method is, which is now something I'm very involved in. I like help teach classes, and I am amazed that we don't know about it. And I'm like eyes bugging that like I didn't know. And I was in constant fear when I was in high school and college that I was pregnant. And I feel like it upset me because I just didn't have that like knowledge of my body that, like you said, from like the kindergarten quiz, but still it's like, we don't know. No one teaches us that. No one teaches us the cycle. And like women and men, like everyone should know that we, like women or people with vaginas cannot get pregnant every day of the month. And when I found that out like as truth, right, I'd heard it for so long and I thought it was just like these woo-woo or granola people. But then when I actually like studied it with people and like understood the science of it, I just was like, I still to this day am in awe that like still people around me like are concerned about getting pregnant, like when they know 100% they're not fertile.
Yeah, this whole conversation, it's funny. We chose the topic. I've done research this whole week about it, and I still feel super triggered because listening to you talk about that, it translates into my next question, which is about sort of the education and what's lacking. And I'm getting really frustrated because all through high school, I was in a boarding school, so I was away from parents. It was just me and my friends. And so many of us took Plan Bs as if they were birth control because we had no idea about fertility. And only in college, like sophomore year, did someone say, like, tell me the bad things about Plan B. And I then freaked out that I had ruined like any chance of having a kid because, you know, it was normalized for us boarding school babies that did not talk about sex, but kind of sort of were having sex. And so, yeah, that's triggering and very uncomfortable. But to add onto my frustration when doing this research, I want to ask about what would you change in the vaginal health education system as it is now in schools, in society? Because, like, you know, I was looking up statistics and man, they had a grouping for like women product statistics, and they had hair care as a group, skin care as a group, cosmetics as a group, and then as a group they had deodorants, antiperspirants, and feminine cleaning as a group. And I was like, where are we? Like, how do we even begin the conversation when we are grouping feminine cleaning with everything else?
Don't put soap in your vagina.
Especially
don't put soap.
Don't. Well, hey, we were going to get to do's and don'ts, but that's exactly right. Don't you dare put soap in your vagina. You know, this is something that stood out to me, was that the US only federally mandated that medical research and research trials are required to include women in 1993, a year after I was born, which means that prior to that, and even now, because even though it was mandated, they still don't actually always analyze the the female body's data, they usually test it on men and then extrapolate it into it must work for women too, instead of recognizing that we have actually different parts in our bodies. And there are much more things that I'm going to sort of shoot out as we have this conversation, but that's my main question, like out of complete frustration, where would you even start?
From the beginning. From as soon as your child can understand what's going on. It's talking about discharge in the underwear, what it means. If your genitals are itchy, what does that mean? You know, do we need to be wiping a different way? Just talking about it, period. I just came from a house where like no one had genitals and no one talked about it. We were all just like Barbie dolls where nothing happened. And like you were saying at your boarding school, that we just sort of have to do this sort of MacGyver piecing together of what we think is right. Usually it's just like people who are older than us, okay, we'll just do that because they must know everything. And this fear of young people having sex and this fear of vaginas and internal genitalia as a whole is why we know nothing about our bodies, why there's no research. I mean, as someone who's going into a doctoral program where research is going to be a huge part of what I'm going to do, there are things like researching the long-term effects of synthetic estrogen in the body. We have been giving people synthetic estrogen, synthetic oxytocin for decades, and there's no study on it. There's no long-term longitudinal study on it. What is that? What is that? So I think it's totally a societal problem. And just in general, this idea of like, oh, let's not talk about it. It like bleeds. It's like, oh, it's so complicated. Like even now in the nursing portion, I'm on the hospitals and I administered a catheter last week. And before I went into the room, everyone's like, oh my gosh, urethras, in women, you'll just have to like find your way. It's so hard to find where all the parts are. And I was like, is it? So, it's just like this feeling of like, that needs to be broken down.
It's interesting that you talk specifically about, the research aspect. I didn't realize how little research was being done in female health, female sanitary products, what's the word I'm looking for? Developments in sanitary options until, the Thinx underwear that came out, and they did part of their whole commercial series was like, let's talk about the distribution of sanitary products, the taxation on sanitary products, the research and the education that's going into this whole field. And I was like, it was the first time that I had heard anything about it. And I was just like, wait, I just assumed that the same amount of money was going towards women's health as was going towards men's health. Like, aren't we all created equal? And since then, it's just become more and more apparent. I know,
What?
so naive me. But that Thinx was like the first evolutionary product in like 30 years to be made within women's sanitary health. We didn't even talk about how tampons that are made with chemicals, how you're putting these tampons into your body that are made with chemicals. Right. And that like nobody talked about that. And you just like, you go and buy the cheapest tampons because tampons are fucking expensive. Excuse my language. And you would just use it. And it wasn't until like 5 years after I started using tampons that I was like, I think I should think about what I'm putting into my body, because nobody's distinguishing the difference between any of these 70 different products in the CVS.
The other point is that nobody is going to do it but me, right? Me and my girlfriends have to figure this out, but nobody is, which makes me also bring up how important it is for this to be a widespread educational shift, because men should know. Anybody that's engaging with My Vagina should know these things.
I think, I totally agree with what Lucia said. I think the conversations need to happen sooner. And I think that's where the education is going to come from. It's not just going to come from our school classes, because it's not really, we can't get to that place in education until we learn how to listen to our bodies. And we learn that we, for ourselves, need to understand that we have discharge at different points in the month and what that means to you. And I think when we can be taught that it's okay to talk about what's going on in our bodies, like you have a cold or a headache or smelly vaginal discharge. Like, what does that mean? And I think it takes, in this bigger scheme of like, genitals and like this and that, it brings the focus back in internally and what's going on with you. And it makes it less about, let me fit into this structure of like, I have to have a period. It has to be 28 days. And like, I have to use this tampon and this and that. And it's like, no, it's about listening to the signs of your body. And that's going to tell us health, a huge thing of health. Like, I'm all about agency, and it's like learning to listen. And I think we only start talking about things when it's bad, when there's pain, and when there's this and that. And then we go to the doctor and they just put a cover up on it that never really looks at the issue deeper. But like, then, like, to the other point, like, we get scared of it then when it becomes a thing, like when we start being sexually active, or a partner is involved in that, and have they ever been privy to blood or this and that. It's like, well, if it's been talked about it more, I think the same thing kind of is with birth, right? Like, we don't talk about it. We used to see births all the time. It used to be like a community thing, right? The wise women, like Xann said, used to like teach us the wisdom of like how to take care of our bodies and do this, and this is what happens to the month. And we've kind of lost that, and lost the ability to listen.
Just to get a little bit deeper into this topic, we've already kind of touched on how underfunded and under-researched all these very different elements of women's health is. But particularly in something that I didn't realize until this year was how much more underfunded and unobserved Black women's health is, and how dangerous it is. And one of the statistics that I first heard this year, which it hadn't even come into my periphery, was that Black American Indian and the Alaska Native women, this is from the CDC, are 2 to 3 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related causes than white women. And it just like instantly opened up my periphery to all of the other dominoes that must exist within that space, within healthcare, within, I don't know if you guys saw that story about Dr. Phillips, who renamed
the instruments.
Thank you. To the Lucy, because who we called the father of modern gynecology was performing shocking experiments on slave women, and how there was this assumption without anesthesia, because there was assumption that Black women had a higher pain tolerance, despite her recorded screams and tears and cries and passing out and getting sick, that somehow there was this big assumption made, and how Dr. Phillips was like, I'm not going to call.
That assumption is still prevalent today. So Shayasia Washington was someone who gave birth at Woodhull Hospital in Brooklyn, New York, and was murdered by an anesthesiologist who would use bigger needles on Black birthing people because we have thicker skin and higher tolerances for pain. So that is something, and there was a study that was done in Kentucky for medical students. I think 60% of them thought that Black people felt less pain and that our skin was thicker than white people. So the foundation of education and, knowledge around internal genitalia and people who have vaginas, at least in this country, the foundation is a white person who would experiment on enslaved people. So I think when the foundation is rotten, then the fruit the tree bears is also rotten. So it's, I just wanted to make a note that is something that people talk about in the past, but it's very prevalent now, and it's murdering people now. And the average that you listed is the national average in New York. We are 12 times more likely to die, and down here in Georgia where I am, it's 5 times more likely. So it varies depending on where you live, what funding, what sort of racist institutions or redlining is prevalent in your city. So yeah, pretty grim. My cousin just wrote an article. She lives up in Ontario, in Toronto, talking about how she would like to have a child, but she is petrified to A, die, and B, to have a Black child running around out in the world. So, and we know that stress and fear lead to worse health outcomes. So it's just like, it feels like a really toxic loop for some of us out here.
Something I'm also like, and I'll just be honest, like it's something new that I'm becoming knowledgeable about, and I am upset that I didn't know about it sooner, but just the reproductive freedom in terms of the disparity and sort of like the birth control, what was given, to low income people on Medicaid. And, I'm finally within this year really educating myself on that. But I also think since we're talking about uncomfortable situations, it's something that, is something I don't think we're really aware of.
Let's get into it. Let's talk about it. Planned Parenthood was started by a white eugenicist.
I don't.
Like, let's talk about it.
What is that? I don't know.
So
I don't know.
So Planned Parenthood was started by a white eugenicist named Margaret Sanger. Eugenics was the idea that Black people had different brains. We have different skin. White is the normal, and then everyone else who's not white varies from that point of normal. So she started Planned Parenthood first as a clinic in a Black neighborhood in Brooklyn, and started experimenting on Black people. And even today, whenever there's a new birth control option on the market, they market it and basically unofficially test it on Black teenage girls. So Nexplanon, that was sort of the biggest one in present day, is the arm implant. And that was heavily pushed in Black and brown neighborhoods and then, later it was found out that they couldn't remove the implant. It was causing infertility. It was traveling to other places in their body. It was causing nerve damage, blood vessel damage, causing damage to people's arms and brachial arteries. So still the experiments are happening. Like that idea is still happening.
Yeah, I just think it speaks to like how deeply the system is just sad, because it's like you said, they talk of, I've learned that like the funding to get it in is paid for. The funding to get it removed, not talked about. It's not a thing. And so, a lot of women aren't given a choice of or they're given a choice of two different types of birth control, like the implant or the pill, but then they're highly like told not to do the pill because then they have to remember it every day. I think they like the doctors try to like provide a choice saying that this is good. They're offering options to women and it's this, but the two choices are not good. And many of these women, due to their health history, should not be on something as intense as these types of birth controls. But that's just not looked at, not worried about.
So this kind of gets into the next segment of our show where we wanted to talk about pregnancy and birthing. First, we're going to talk about sex and contraceptives, what the different options are, and then I want to get into fertility tracking with you, Kenna. So just as like a quick list, some of the options are dental dams, condoms, IUDs, the pills, and the implant. As far as...
Are we missing any?
Can dental dams prevent pregnancy? I don't think they can.
No, not contraceptives, but they prevent
STIs.
Diseases.
Yeah. There's also the cup. There's the cup.
The cup?
Yeah, for people who have sex with penises. No, the cup that catches sperm.
Oh,
it's like
FemCap.
Yeah.
I've only seen that like once.
And the foam. There's foam. I've never seen it, but there's foam.
I think it's kind of wild. Tsilala and I talked about this a little bit in prep for this show, how so much birth control and protection against diseases are women's responsibilities. So all of this birth control, when we talk about all these different birth controls, from IUD to the pill to the everything that we've mentioned, these are all highly experimental bodily insertions that women have to undergo and that are hormonal, like balance your hormones in some way, which obviously has a huge effect on your body. And so, and how there isn't the same social pressure for men to have any sort of birth control whatsoever. Jose, I just wonder if you have any thoughts about that.
Thought is, my goodness, how horrible. I'm so sorry. Like, I mean, truly, like that. It's like I couldn't even imagine what that would be like. I mean, as somebody who's concerned about, like, what does this almond do to my body? Like, is this a good almond? Where does it come from? How does it, like, I mean, and that's just like food, to have, like, if I had to be concerned about, I mean, to be honest, I should be clear, like, I am concerned about these things because I asked my girlfriend, who's less concerned than I am. And I think that part of why she's less concerned is that she's just super resilient, at least seemingly, and knock on wood, like, she continues to live a very healthy life. But I've said to her several times, she's got an IUD, like, hey, like, is that good? Are you sure? She's like, well, isn't your life great? You don't have to ever worry about me getting pregnant. We don't have to use protection, yada, yada, yada. I'm like, I would gladly wear protection or figure something out if this is something that, especially this is someone I'm looking to, like, start a family with. If this is negatively affecting her, our future, like her, I don't know. I mean, her mood, her hormones, her estrogen, like, I'm concerned about that stuff for myself. And as somebody that I love, I'm concerned about, how it affects her. Anyways, I just, I feel grateful that it's not something that affects my personal life, because I know that it would just make me that much more frustrated than I already am about the things that I'm trying to figure out, what's right and wrong, what's up and down, what's whatever. It's so hard to find information. And that I think is the most difficult thing for me. And again, relating this back to, the four of you, I find it really frustrating when your intentions are good, yet you're struggling with, like, being met with the truth or something. Like, your intention was to connect with your father, let's say, Xann, yet there was a wall. So then it shut you down. Your intentions are to educate yourself, but just because you find something on Google or your doctor says one thing does not mean that that's the truth. And sometimes people have to find out the hard way. It's like, whose fault is it really? It's like, if you're just trying to do what you're told and be responsible. So I don't know. My thought is that it's sad.
Jose, have you had any conversations with other men about the same worries you have with your girlfriend? Are those conversations that you see? Because I'm just wondering, like, if the education system is rotten from the core and we've just got girls talking to girls, what are the next steps in boys talking to boys about even getting on the same level of concern?
I mean, I think the first thing, or I shouldn't say the first thing, one of many things could be people getting involved the way in which I was presented with the opportunity to get involved. When Xann called me and asked if this is something that I'd be interested in talking about, I don't know, for me, it was a no-brainer, especially during these times. It's like, it's so important to communicate, whether it's about, politics or humanitarian issues or sex ed. Like, being open and willing to be vulnerable is really important. And part of that isn't just your ability or your willingness to be, but being presented, I guess, with options or opportunities to nurture that. So I feel grateful for one, my nurture, like, my nature to be willing to have these conversations, but even more grateful for being presented with an opportunity to, like, go into it. Like, I'm learning so much already right now.
So the big question around limiting men's potency to impregnate a woman aside, all that research and funding that should also be going on whilst women's are having to take the pill, etc. All of that aside, because I just feel like that would be a huge bike rack conversation. Can we talk a little bit about fertility tracking? Can you tell us a little bit about what it is?
Yeah, I know nothing. Okay. I have apps that I don't pay attention to, and that's it.
Yeah, well, I can comment on the apps, but maybe that's a bike rack too. And I think it kind of goes well because, like, my comment to all this too is, and I guess I feel like fertility awareness, and I'll kind of explain it, but I think it is that that like opening, Jose, like you're saying, that like would allow partners to be more involved. Because and maybe this is too much information, but like I truly feel like my partner is just as much at fault if we get pregnant, because he's like right there along with me now with my fertility, and it's my fertility, right? But I feel like because we're in a partnership and we're sexually active, he's got a part in it. It's not just about me, although I am, it's my body. So fertility awareness is basically, it's learning about your fertility signs. There's many different, throughout the years, there's many different methods. You know, there's a method that sort of came out of the church in terms of talking about like family planning, and that there's sort of the realm of like rhythm method, which isn't fertility awareness, but it's more sort of like kind of realizing when you're fertile. Rhythm method is what I think of most apps, because they have like predictors on them. That's sort of the rhythm method. And then fertility awareness is really that daily checking of your fertility signs, which the two major ones are taking your temperature, your basal body thermometer in the morning, and then checking your cervical fluid 3 times a day, and charting and assessing. There's rules to sort of know where you are. It definitely takes learning in the beginning, hands down, and that can definitely be a roadblock for some. It can become a very natural thing that takes me about 2 minutes each day, but I've been doing it for almost 5 years now. Yeah, but I do think that it's something, you know, I have a lot of friends that know I do this, and I talk about it all the time because I'm passionate about it, but there's just so much resistance and fear to doing it. And I totally get it. Like, I would never do what I do now when I was just starting out in my sexual life. But, you know, being backed by the science and really knowing my body, like, talk about listening to your body, and knowing if something's off, and just also, like, you know, you can't have sex and the man can't come inside you every day of the month. And that's something that some people just don't want. And, you know, to each their own. Like, this isn't about this is better or this is better. But, you know, I think for some people going on the pill isn't an option. It's not good for them. For some people, it's the greatest thing. And like, I think if it's your decision, then that's wonderful. But I think all these decisions and options should be given, and you should be able to decide what's best for you and be provided with the best education and all the side effects that all of these birth control methods have. Did I do an okay job of explaining fertility awareness? It's a big, like, there's lots of classes one should take or meet with someone in order to like do it fully as a birth control method. But I think it's a pretty amazing and powerful birth control method.
I think also, you know, what we're talking about on this show is knowing that you have options and what those options are, understanding your body. I think that it also should be mentioned just quickly, because we haven't talked about it as far as birth control is concerned. I started taking birth control because my periods were so bad. It was crippling. Like, my pain, my acne was horrible. It was like I was so embarrassed to walk out the door. My flow was really heavy. Like, I'd have 3 weeks of cramping before, during, and after. I would have a heavy flow, and I had this acne, and I was like, make it stop. And they were like, go on this birth control. It'll stop all of those things. And it was the same thing like when I was asked to sign the dotted line for my student loans. Like, there was no like, here are all the things that could go wrong, or this is what this really is. It was like, take these hormones and they're going to change your body and you'll feel better. But it wasn't like, I had this wake up moment where I was like, I've been taking chemical hormones like my whole adult life. And what are the effects of that? How is that going to affect my fertility? How is that going to affect when I go off birth control? How is my body going to react, given that I've never let in my body in its full mature state has never had its own hormones just flowing freely on its own through my body. And that's never discussed.
Well, and I wonder too, like, I think about this and I'd love your thoughts. Like, birth control, I mean, and that, like, for some, like, that's what they need. They need it to stop to, like, live their life, and it does give that freedom, but it doesn't fix the problem. So, like, when when you come off of it, like, what are we faced with, right? But at the time, it's like there were issues, right? Like, we needed to fix those, but because there's been a lack in study over the whole system, the female system, we don't have those answers yet. I think alternative medicine and that kind of stuff is getting there, but the pill should, I don't know, like, the pill for birth control, yes, but the pill to fix, like, PMS or female issues does nothing. And, like, come at me if you think differently, but I don't know.
Oh, my friend went on birth control to fix pimples on her face.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She was a
I
kid.
remember I did that when I was 16. My mother was like, we can't tell your father that the dermatologist gave you birth control. And I knew after 1 month, I was like, absolutely not. That was when they were prescribing all of us 14-year-olds Yaz, which was recalled because it made people kill themselves. Like, and that's the first thing that jumped out at me, that it's like, the pill is just so unimaginative. Like, you get all of these signs and symptoms. Our job as healthcare providers is to be detectives. And someone's just like, just take this pill. Like, I don't want to be curious about why you're cramping for 3 weeks. I'm gonna have to get, like, the ultrasound machine out. Like, I just don't want to be curious. So there's clearly a problem because you need to live your life, but just throwing this pill at kids. I mean, I feel like, I'm assuming that we're around the same age, but I feel like our generation was just like the pill generation. All of my friends who have sex with people with penises have been on the pill since they were 16. And most of them are having trouble with their fertility. And I'm just like, what is happening? What is happening?
So that actually asks, my next question is, let's bring it into birthing. And Lucia,
Yes,
specifically for you, what do we not know? I mean, I want to talk about alternative birthing, sort of ways to do it. Traditional Western medicine might not be that great. What else can we use? And then, like, what is it that we don't know about birthing? What's, like, the one thing that you wish more people knew about birthing?
Well, we don't know anything. Like, okay, we can go around and say 2 things you know about giving birth. We can start with Jose. What are 2 things you know about giving birth?
Yeah.
That it seems very painful. And what else do I know? Is that it can be done outside of a hospital.
Great answer, Jose. Okay, Xann, what are the 2 things?
us, Lucia.
Everyone can go around and tell me 2 things that you know about birth. Who wants to go next?
Okay, I'll say that actually, like, the squatting position is better than this, like, lie on your back.
Okay, yeah.
Like, some position
yeah.
that they... that this one was, like, I guess I should have known this earlier, but, like, labor starts... Like, labor can last for 15 hours, and I'm always like, really? How? Because I always thought that labor was when the baby exits, but it's actually when the cervix is stretched open a certain amount, and I could be using wrong vocabulary.
You're right.
So I don't know if I know.
You're right. And 15 hours is very short, actually. So, yeah,
Really?
that's pretty great.
I know a lot of stuff. Hypnobirthing is something that I got really into when I met somebody who had done hypnobirthing, which is a practice in which you use meditation and breathing techniques to kind of create a non-stressful environment. Like, all we think about in birthing is like these women like up like this and they're screaming and like that's how we think about birth. But actually that like we were all birthed, so this can't, like, coming into the world in a traumatic environment isn't the only option. And my sister actually trained as a doula, so I know that we don't have to just do it. It shouldn't just be, this stressful, unsupportive environment. And it doesn't just have to be like, if you have your partner, if your partner is male and they're in the room, that their hand is like your only supportive tool, that actually there's like all this other support system, you know, midwives, doulas, who can be there to kind of, again, help ensure that it's a not stressful environment as you are naturally giving birth, which I'm really hyped about.
I'll just add quickly because I want to know what Lucia has to say. I just did a doula training, and so I like bow to you because I think the work that doulas do is amazing. I did it because I see a lot of pregnant women in my acupuncture practice. But something I was shocked at learning was OBs often are not, don't go through a natural birth, that they're sort of like, that's not part of like schooling. And it's just shocking to me because they're kind of like surgeons, right? So like birth is birth is a physiological process. It's not pathological. So it's shocking that it's like suddenly birth and then surgeon level, when really, like, if you think of any other part of the body, it's like you go through so many doctors before you get that like top notch like surgeon doctor. And it just sort of, it shocked me.
Yeah. Thank you everyone for sharing. Sorry for hijacking. Good. I mean, I think Jose touched on something that is huge and what people think about is pain. So there's a lot of fear around giving birth, just like how we're disconnected from the vagina or from internal genitalia. We are so disconnected from birth. It's how we all got here. It's how we keep on getting here. And so what you need to know about birth is that it doesn't have to be scary. It doesn't have to be painful, and it doesn't have to be an emergency. It's not an emergency. There are certain situations where it is an emergency and then you need to be in the hospital. But I am definitely one of the believers that birth doesn't belong in the hospital as a norm. It's not a sickness. It's not a disease. It's not an emergency. It's not like the movies where your water breaks and suddenly you're screaming. It's like you're lying down and you're like, oh, what's that? You go back to sleep. And then that happens like 20 minutes later and you're like, what is that weird crampy feeling? And then it progresses. That's why it takes 24 hours, because like your body, your cervix, your baby all have to decide how and when it's happening. I think one of the biggest lessons is that of the little research that we do know about birth is that there are some scientists that believe that hormones, or that believe that babies release hormones that make birth happen. So it's actually like this song and dance between the fetus and the pregnant person, sort of working together. And also, if the baby's head is down, they actually kick off the top of what we call the fundus, which is the top of your uterus, like sort of like the muscle of the uterus, to like push themselves down. It's like, it's wild. It's great.
What communication?
Yeah. It's pretty amazing. I mean, I think there's a lot we don't know about birth.
It's beautiful.
I think there's a lot that OBs don't know about birth. I remember one of the first births I went to, a resident poked his head in. He's like, hey, I've never seen a vaginal birth. Can I watch yours? And we were like, no, but that's messed up. That's really messed up. That birth is actually just like a normal, non-emergency, really intense, really sort of groundbreaking and earth-shattering for some folks, but that it's usually 80% of the time not an emergency.
Tsilala, feel free to bike rack me if necessary, but epidurals, Lucia, are they like, I just feel like so many people who give hospital births are just expected to get an epidural, and I'm just, tell me, what is?
Epidurals in a hospital make a lot of sense because hospital rooms aren't made for giving birth. There's no room. Because insurance is like the ruler of the MIC. MIC is medical industrialized complex. So insurance says you need to be on the bed because fall risk is a big way that hospitals get sued. And so there's no room for you to move. Movement is a big part of labor progress. You're just lying in this bed, and every person that comes in and out of the room asks you if you want to have an epidural, because the sensations, the waves, the contractions, the pain, whatever you want to call it, is very intense, and you're gonna make noise. You're gonna squeeze someone's hand. You're gonna squat. You might even scream. And in this sort of like white scientisty hospital space, that's not welcome. Everyone wants you to be quiet. They want you to stay in your bed, and they want you to push out this baby in 15 hours. And if you haven't done it in 15 hours, then we're going to have to start giving you drugs. So epidurals in the hospital are kind of go hand in hand. I mean, when I have clients that are like, I'm having a hospital birth and I don't want an epidural, I'm like, we have our work cut out for us. Because it's so enforced, it's a big moneymaker for hospitals. Everyone gets to take a nap, the nurse gets to go chill, the OB gets to chill out, there's no sound. So epidurals make a lot of sense in the hospital. But as we are seeing with many usually Black birthing people that they're killing people. And they leak, and your spinal fluid is just leaking, and they're like, meh, you have a headache for a few months. It's another thing. It's like signing your student loans. There's no sort of oh yeah, and all these things could also happen that we don't also talk about, but yeah, just take it. Just take a needle in the back. It's good. But I've also seen epidurals be wonderful for birth. Someone who cannot handle the pain, who's scared by the pain, who's freaking out, they get an epidural. We all get a nap. She wakes up, the baby's crowning, and here we go. And it was beautiful and just what she needed. But then there's sometimes where an epidural just stops labor. Another thing they don't tell you is that the drugs cross the placenta. So epidural babies are usually sleepy. And then that leads to nurses trying to force the babies to eat, but it's I'll just give in all these narcotics. I'm tired. And then they're you have to, it's what we call the cascade.
I think the subtext of our conversation today, not that it necessarily needs to be said, but that whatever your choice is, for the audience, do what makes sense for you. Absolutely. If a hospital birth is what makes you feel comfortable, if an epidural is what makes you feel comfortable, that's great. Absolutely. But what we're trying to do here is shine some light up around your options, because options are power.
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's really what today is about.
Mm-hmm. I'm overwhelmed with things I didn't know, and things I'm angry about, things I'm shocked about, and things that I'm super speechless. So first, thank you so much. But we always we start with what's your UNC, and we try to end with a what's your joy. But we wanted to gear it around vaginas and sexual education. And so the question that we had for our guests are, what about your vagina education, women's health education has prompted confidence in your life?
I'm gonna share also. I feel up until very recently, I didn't feel because of the lack of women's health education that goes on across the board, that I didn't have any options. And so I got the birth control, I got the IUD. When I thought about birth and pregnancy, I thought about hospital births. And it's only in the last couple of years that I've started to be aware of what my other options are. And that's really been really empowering for me to think, I don't take a lot of medication. But why am I on birth control? And so that suddenly this empowerment allows me to make decisions that are best for me and my body, and that I'm not pigeonholed into one option anymore, that I can pick and choose from a variety of different options that make sense for my life, so that I can be healthy and live in health.
There's so many joyful things that I have learned about my genitalia and other people's genitalia. I will say that queerness is the best thing that's ever happened to me, and the way that I've been able to observe other people who have vaginas and the confidence. I mean, the biggest learning moment was that whatever my vagina looks like is okay. Is okay. That vaginas look like I have a whole poster of all these different kinds of looking vulvas, and I just have that in my office, so I can always look at it and be whatever is going on is okay. Whatever you do is your choice, and it's okay. And whatever your normal is okay. So that just sort of acceptance, no shame, has been a huge weight off my shoulders. And I haven't felt shame around my genitalia in so long. And I used to be so embarrassed and like so insecure, and I didn't know what the parts were. And I was just like, ew, and there's hair. Like, what am I supposed to do? And now I just take so much joy in my genitalia and the other people that I'm blessed to see their genitalia. Yeah, I have a lot of joy. Even though I talked about a lot of intense things, I take a lot of joy from the movement of people not giving birth in hospitals, people having beautiful births in hospitals, how people are taking things back in their own hands, like all this telehealth. People are buying blood pressure cuffs, people are checking their own cervixes, people are mapping, like feeling their belly and being like, oh, my baby's head is over here. Like, I just love all this empowerment and going home and making it more community based. So that's really, really exciting.
Did you say making it more community based?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just being like, hey, neighbor, I'm pregnant. If you hear me screaming, bring over some food. That'd be helpful, you know.
You know, what's also really joyful is by hearing like the education that I'm getting has given me a lot of joy, because I just didn't know all that. I didn't know what's going on in the world unless I'm a part of the birthing experience myself. I don't know how the rest of humanity is doing it and dealing with it. And that in itself is inspiring for when I do go on that journey, right? That I don't feel as alone already in my future prospects.
I've been really fortunate, and I'm making assumptions to some degree, but I think that my family, maybe more than others, are inclined to question like mainstream medicinal, like or medical advice. And because I've been exposed to things like Reiki when I was a little kid, I didn't even question what it was. I just like used to get migraines, and my mother would bring me to my like Titi Nodo's house, and like she would just like put her hands on me and heal me. And I just like, I don't know, I just go to her house and she healed me. So I think that that element of like alternative, like, you know, medicine or homeopathic like approaches is strong in my family. So much so, and granted, I grew up in a house with just like my mom joked that even the dog had a penis, you know, like where I don't think we uh, left too much room for my mom to connect and express her femininity, and I apologize for that now, like just me and my brother and my dad and the dog just being whatever guys. But really what I'm trying to get to is I've I've never felt averted to having conversations that were maybe a little bit more like sensitive or embarrassing. And Xann knows the story a little bit, but I remember when I first started dating my current girlfriend, I got a UTI and I had never experienced it before. But looking up the symptoms, I was just like, I'm pretty sure I have a UTI. And I called my mom just because in my mind, I was like, I think women get this more than men. And I knew that she would, because I looked up what to do and I didn't trust anything that was online. I didn't want to go to the doctor because I don't trust doctors sometimes, whatever. And she was like, oh, like, you know, talk to your grandmother about that, but like, you got to go to the health food store and get D-Manus. And I'm like, what's that? And she's like, you know, it helps with UTIs as opposed to like getting on antibiotics or, you know, drinking cranberry juice or whatever. And it went away like after a week. And I didn't think anything of it, but just like this conversation is just sparking, I guess, the realization that like, not that I'm not aware of it, but just feeling grateful that I felt comfortable enough to call my mother. And she felt comfortable enough to just be like, I mean, make a joke. She's like, oh, you've got newlywed syndrome. I'm like, what's that? She's like, well, you just started dating a girl. You're having sex all the time. I was like, whoa, okay. You know, but like, you know, like we laughed and whatever. And then I felt like I was able to heal. And then I actually shared that information with Xann one time when she was dealing with that. And I was apparently, she claims, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, was the first person to let her know that D-Manus was an option, you know?
A big bike rack moment from this show, which I did not divulge into, is the fact that how many people across the board get UTIs, especially women, and how every single time I got a UTI, the doctor would put me on antibiotics and it destroyed my body. It destroyed every part of my body so much that I had to take off work, and I'm still recovering a year later. And that actually there are lots of natural ways that's not drinking cranberry juice, which I'm not sure actually works, to be honest with you. Yeah, it's wild to me that I had to learn about UTI health through Jose.
Sure. I want to mention I had talked about this earlier, but it's Uqora, Uqora, and that is the female-led UTI prevention site that has different resources for dealing with different UTIs. It looks very high end, but the education portion of it at least is a good place to start. Thank you guys so much for coming. Thank you for giving us your time and your voice and your insight.
And that's the UNCK. Before we jump into our R&D, we wanted to share some options for inclusive language we've researched since this recording. When talking about vaginal health and mentioning genders, it's very easy to identify people as women's health, or girls or boys or ladies, rather than saying people who have vaginas, people who have sex with vaginas, etc. And that's what we wanted to get into right now. When we started having this conversation, when we were discussing inclusive language before the episode, I thought I knew everything that I had to prepare. I thought that I had tried to be inclusive in my language by saying introitus, which is a word for vaginal canal, which you only see that word, or I've only seen it when looking at transitional surgeries. So in that way, I thought that I had really tried to make sure that no one was left behind. But when it comes to saying people with vaginas or persons of color, sometimes the inclusive language is really clear. Persons of color, POCs are everywhere, and I'm able to recognize that. But there are some that I'm not. And Xann, I really wanted to use this as an opportunity to share with our audience who may also not have some of these tools available to them or know where to look, some tips.
Absolutely. I also just think, practice makes perfect. And until we obviously first recognize what inclusive language really is and have lots of examples of how it's applied to daily conversations, we can then, once we have that, we can start to have those conversations and apply them in our day-to-day language,
Yeah, so this comes from the Family Institute at Northwestern University. They have a really cool article, document about it. And I wanted to share this quote by John E. McIntyre, who is the president of ACEs for the Society of Editing, who wrote this in 2017. He said, "Inclusive language should include enough scope to allow people to identify themselves as they choose." And that's what forward movement looks like in our society, is allowing people to identify for themselves anything, because who wants to be in a box that someone else put them in? So I understand it. And I wanted to share some of these examples, and maybe we can just go one by one. So the first one, especially in the discussion we just had, instead of saying woman or man, try saying person with a vagina or person with a penis, unless you're told otherwise.
Instead of saying him, her, she, he, try saying they.
Instead of saying sex change or sex operation, try saying sex reassignment or gender affirming surgery.
Instead of saying transgenders as a noun or transgendered, say transgender person.
Mm-hmm. That S just adds a whole lot of
pointed negativity.
Yeah, absolutely. Somehow it's very demeaning. Instead of saying, "Hey guys," as a greeting, you can say, "Hey everyone," or "Hi all," or I say, "Hey y'all."
That was a big one. That was a big one for me.
Hey
it's
y'all.
Like so general. No, just because, we're so used to hearing "ladies and gentlemen," like get ready for the show. And every time I hear that, I always think, but what if we're not all ladies and gentlemen?
Yeah, actually, this reminds me of, just the idea that everything has been so gendered for so long. One of our previous guests, Jordiana, once shared with me this brilliant way of looking at gender reveals, where Jordiana was like, "I don't really like gender reveals because they are celebrating a baby's sexual parts, which is weird, but they're cute."
It's so weird because what reaction can you have other than being really excited that...
Right, because we're celebrating it exists.
Which we already know. That's why we already showed up. Like, the enthusiasm's already there. It's just like, shooting a firework into the air. Like, people just want something to be like,
yeah. I saw a gender reveal video a couple days ago on Twitter that was hilarious, where a mother and her child popped a balloon and nothing came out. And then from behind the camera person, like an auntie said, "Y'all got me messed up," and pulled off her wig, and there was a blue wig on top. It was very good.
That's very creative. I love
that. Speaking of inclusive language, just now I had to pause myself a bunch of times to make sure that I was using inclusive language, because in the video, the mother was with a child that looks like a person with a vagina, but a person with a penis. But how am I to know? And also, it's none of my business. And so I chose to say child instead. So let's get through the rest of these to see what else we have. Okay, let's get through these. When instead of using disabled person, which I love this one. Instead of using disabled person, handicapped, crippled, or challenged, try using person with a disability. That's not their entirety. They just have this as something attached to themselves as an already fully realized person, which
the next one is really similar. Instead of saying wheelchair bound, I saw a couple of really disrespectful ones also within this list that I'm not going to say out loud, but say person who uses a wheelchair.
Instead of saying bipolar person or they're bipolar, say someone with bipolar disorder.
Instead of saying Downs, retarded, mentally disabled, say person with Down syndrome.
Mm-hmm. We're getting into part of the socioeconomic side of the conversation, which is really important, especially when listening to how people in politics love to abuse these words. Instead of saying inner city, try saying under-resourced.
And how these words are used to mean something much greater than the terms that they are meant to mean. So instead of saying disinvested, say low opportunity.
Instead of disadvantaged, say neighborhoods with high poverty rates.
Instead of saying distressed neighborhoods, try saying neighborhoods with access to fewer opportunities.
Instead of saying working poor, try saying hardworking, working hard to make ends meet.
And instead of saying homeless people or the homeless, try saying people experiencing homelessness.
There are many more of these sorts of lists on the website, which will be linked in our show notes. But again, that was at the Family Institute at Northwestern University. We only picked out a few that were specific to things we've talked about in the past, as well as this conversation that we just had.
I think we're going to also, on the show moving forward, try to call each other out if we're not using inclusive language. These are just a couple of examples across the spectrum for how we talk about each other and other people that we hope that we can start to apply to our real lives in day-to-day conversation. And I mean, who isn't talking about politics and suppression right now? So there is so much opportunity for us to try out some of this language. When we talk about healthcare, when we talk about everything that's going on right now, just make sure that we are being as inclusive and inviting and fair in the way that we talk about people.
Yeah, it's really easy to say, this seems like hard work, I don't want to do it, when no one has given you even the tools to begin, right? But it's actually much easier to change a word because we all have pretty good handle on the English language and have used these words in other sentences in the past to attempt to use them in new ways today. And it doesn't hurt anybody, doesn't hurt ourselves. We had no trouble listing this list. And as you said, practice makes perfect. So it's okay if you stumble. It's okay if you have to pause and slow down and make a mistake and apologize, as long as you get back up and do the work, which is what we're trying to do here.
So moving into the R&D of the episode, what'd you think?
There were so many parts of the conversation that I didn't know. So I was grateful that I could ask the people who knew more than me, you know. I was really, really grateful for that. Yeah.
Yeah, a really educational one. I think the big thing, obviously, that we talked about on the show is options and knowing your options, and rather than saying, you know, you must do X, knowing that you have all these different things that you could, and being able to choose between them, having the information. Obviously, around alternative birthing methods, or actually more natural birthing methods, non-hospital births, around fertility tracking, around, you know, other forms of birth control. These are all things that I wish I had talked about in high school, and it feels way late to be talking about these things when I've just turned 30. I also just wanted to add in, and I know that this is the way that we designed the show, but I'm so glad that Jose came on the show as the male representative, because I think when we talk about healthcare, it is gendered, and then only the responsibility of that person to make a decision. But in, you know, as far as birth control is concerned, I think that your partner should be part of that conversation. They should bear that responsibility as well. If you're somebody who's neurotic like I am, you know, I'm already going to have a plan, but, you know, if you're my partner, you should be showing up with a plan too. It shouldn't just all be on me. And I think that society has made pregnancy, the repercussions of pregnancy, birth control, the woman's responsibility, or the person who's birthed life's responsibility in every category. And I just think that's outdated. I think it's outdated.
Yeah. Kenny had mentioned this on sex education, like the part 1 episode, where, he said, if you are having sex with someone with a different anatomy and you don't know anything about that anatomy, everyone's in a disservice, you know? Let alone all of the complications and worries that women have to deal with, that people with vaginas have to deal with, versus people with penises in this specific world. It's really important to have someone who can support you from a different privilege, you know, or from an outside view. If you're not the one getting the surgery or getting a treatment for something, that you have someone, male or female or non-gendered, who knows exactly what you need, because they have the information and they've done the research and can advocate for you. I think that's rare, to be honest. But we do have some more of this R&D that we recorded in the actual episode that we will make sure to link right after this, so you can hear the rest of our R&D.
I'm excited to continue this conversation about
For sure.
all these different topics. I feel like they really need their own shows, you know, pregnancy, birthing, contraceptives, you know, language in which you can talk about health to younger people. What are ways that you can make other people feel comfortable talking about health in general, talk about sex, talk about just all of this, you know, just really starting to dig in, because I think what was said on the show is that, you know, we don't dig in enough. And it's time for this to no longer be taboo, because we should learn from each other. We are communal beings. We are tribal beings. And so if we are just all in it on our own for every experience, how are we ever going to evolve?
Yeah, I think Lucia brought a point up about how she was finding joy and how things are coming back to the community. And I think your point is in the same vein for me. Like, the more we have the conversations, the more we're connected, the more we're not sort of blind because of sort of propaganda that sells drugs and sells things for people that make money off of us.
I think that there's something in this in preparatory conversations. So rather than waiting until you're feeling the pain of a UTI and being like, let me call everybody in my directory, you know, it should be the responsibility of the female elders to say, here is the regular things that happen to a lot of women, or here's some experiences and here's how you deal with those. This is what this might feel like. You know, those, we have to, you know, be coming at it from the front rather than the back. This shouldn't be a learning experience after the fact, but, you know, knowing that we can, that door is open, that we can call whoever it is, you know, Jose feels comfortable talking to his mom, whether it's your mom, an auntie, you know, removing the taboo so that I can call somebody and say, what is this? The first time that I got, the first UTI that I ever got, I went to the hospital because I was in such excruciating pain, and none of my roommates, who were all the same, you know, we were all 20 or 19, had ever experienced it. And I was slapped with an $800 bill from something that happens to most people. Oh, yeah. So that's quite common. So
I'm sorry you went through that.
Anyway, so knowledge is power. So let's dig in.
Yep. All right, guys. Thank you for joining us at UNCK. We'll see you in the next one.
And that's the show. Make sure to subscribe to UNCK on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast, as it helps the show grow.